Right on. So thanks for coming on the show, bro.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to do it. I'm excited.
Me too. I'm excited too. What time is it where you are?
Uh, I think you and I are on the same time
Oh,
zone.
okay.
It's like 8:38
Oh,
here. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, yeah. Where are you living again?
I'm in Asheville, North Carolina.
Asheville. Okay. Right on. Right on.
Yeah, yeah. And you're there in what was the name of the town we were in?
Ashburn, Virginia.
Yeah, right,
Oh
right,
yeah, I'm right
right.
by the lodge there. I'm like, 10-minute drive from the lodge.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, man, welcome to the show, brother Brian Stanford. It's a real pleasure to have you on. I know you have a lot of interest in Gnosticism, so I think that's going to be one of the focuses of this show is to kind of discuss some of those aspects and kind of brainstorm
Great.
with you on that. But usually how I start the show is by learning a little bit about the brother and like your background and basically like your life experience, how you grew up, and how that led you to an interest in all things esoteric, because obviously you're interested in some pretty deep stuff. So was this something you were sort of born with and you always been a curious guy? I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at is like, how did your upbringing and your childhood, how did that all lead to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. It's I was born when my parents were still in college. My dad was pretty much right out of Vietnam. My mom was 20 years old. I first few years of my life lived in married student housing at the University of Tennessee, and I grew up in a household with a father who was pretty staunchly. Um, he would call himself an atheist, although I think he is actually too angry at God to really be considered an atheist. But his experiences in Vietnam had very much soured him on the idea of divinity,
I
to
can
say the
understand.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
my mother was a Southern Mississippi girl raised in the Baptist and Presbyterian traditions, and had a very has had a very interesting relationship with Christianity throughout my life. So in my very early years, it didn't seem to manifest very much. And in my kind of formative years, my mother got very, what would you say, almost fundamentalist, and got involved in Southern Baptism, or the Southern Baptist Church, kind of to the consternation of my father. And so in my formative years, I had this pressure of my mother's Christianity that was also blocked by the fact that my father would not allow her to force us to go to church or to force us to do anything religious that we did not want to do. But we definitely heard Bible stories, and we definitely heard messages of Christianity. And then I had my maternal grandmother, who was almost like a second mother to me, who's a very Christian woman, but in a deeply what I would describe as a mystical way. So she read some pretty deep mystic Christian theologians, but also lived in a small town in Mississippi, and went to a church where she probably couldn't openly talk about all of those things.
that would have
But
been
she
weird
was
for them.
also, yeah, and she was definitely a person of spiritual nourishment in my life. And I think I really started getting interested, deeply interested in those kinds of things at around 14, 15 years old. I had been doing martial arts for quite a while and watching kung fu movies and seeing the Shaolin
Yes.
Temple. And so I
I used to
decided I
watch
wanted
Kung Fu
to,
Theater. Did you watch Kung Fu Theater?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
Kung Fu
grew up on
theater.
that. That
Me
and
too.
macaroni
Me
and
too.
cheese.
Yeah. Well, Kung Fu theater got me wanting to be a Shaolin monk and learn about Buddhism.
Mm.
Um, and I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I was at a street festival one time when I think I was about 15, and I ran across the Hare Krishnas, and they had a book that had a picture of Buddha on the cover, and I was like, oh wow, I'm really interested in learning about the Buddha. And they told me, well, you should come to the temple. Here's the
Of
address for where
course.
the temple is. You
Yeah.
should come by. we'll talk to you about the Buddha. And so, of course, I went to the temple, and they definitely did not talk about the Buddha, but talked about how the Buddha was an incarnation of Krishna. And
they have
anyway,
the best free vegetarian meals. I mean, I used to go to the Hare Krishna temple sometimes for the food and the philosophy discussions, and their food was fantastic. That was like their secret weapon to get people to join, I think.
Yeah, it definitely it definitely is. And they have this really interesting part of their theology that the food is actually it's the remnants of what God has eaten. So just eating it yourself is going to bring you to God in one way or another, right. Almost against your will, which is definitely how it happened with me. And I spent quite a few years living at the Hare Krishna temple, going to the Hare Krishna temple all the time, got very, very deeply involved. It was my first real experience of worshiping the divine.
Wow,
I went on from there.
Hare Krishna for a period of time. That's interesting.
Yeah, I was up until the point, I think when I was about 18 years old, and there was kind of a decision being forced on me, become a monk or get married. And I wanted to be a monk, but I didn't want to give up women. So the guru at the temple was like, okay, no problem. And I remember very clearly one day he just sat me down and said, here's what's going to happen. Brian, you're going to marry so-and-so, and we're going to set you up at this house down the street, and you're going to sell books, and she'll cook for the temple, and you'll have a nice devotee family, and boom, boom, that's it. That's your life. And it scared me to death, and I walked out and didn't come back for 3 years.
Right. That's way too much control over you.
Yeah, it was definitely shocking. And from there, I started exploring Buddhism some more, and ended up living in a Zen temple for a while.
In the States or in Japan?
Yeah, in the States.
Okay.
A temple that was operated by the Korean community in Texas. And lived there for a while with a Zen monk that was living there from Korea, and just kind of tried off and on living in ashrams, living in temples, being a spiritual practitioner. And also, strangely, at that time, I got very involved in drugs and hard drugs, and became a heroin addict while living in a Zen temple.
Oh my God, what a combination. As if
it was really, really strange.
Meditation, you needed to add the heroin on the top of it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a very strange combination, but that's definitely what I was doing, and was, very much involved in kind of outlaw lifestyle, selling drugs, taking drugs, and meditating and studying Zen koans and the sutras and all of that kind of stuff. And this was pretty much all through my 20s. And then in my 30s, as it does, if you continue to be a heroin addict for long enough, I went down one of the two roads they tell you you'll go down. You'll either die or you'll go to prison. And I ended up going to prison
wow.
in Texas. Yeah. Yes.
Oh my
yes.
God. Wow.
Yeah.
How long were you in prison, man? Shit.
I was in prison for 6 years.
Wow. That's a long time. That'll toughen you up.
It's a very long time. It was a very long time.
Oh my God. I mean, we could do a show just on your experience there and how that affected you spiritually.
I mean, it was really very much Alexander Solzhenitsyn writes in the Gulag Archipelago about how, he would find himself even years after being released in prayer, thanking God for the experience of being put in the Gulag. And I very much feel that way about my prison experience. I feel it was the divine interfering in saving my life in a literal sense. Like, prison was very much a alchemical fire for me. And I had a lot of archetypal experiences in prison. I ended up taking some college courses and met an anthropology professor who really kind of singled me and a couple of other guys out to explain to us that we were in the midst of the classic hero's journey, that we had become ill with all the illnesses of our culture, drug addiction, greed, crime. We had died, and we were now traveling in the underworld. and we could either be lost forever in the underworld, or we could resurrect and attempt to bring something back to our communities, and become healed and become warriors. And that very much became the focus for me in my travels in prison. And oddly, I met a Mason when I was in prison, an older man who was a lawyer who was in prison for a bunch of DWIs. And he would,
Masons like
he would
their
talk to
whiskey.
me about, and he was an amazing guy and a very good guy, but just had a serious drinking problem, and introduced me to Albert Pike, and he had Morals and Dogma in prison, and used to read it with me and talk to me about that and about Emerson, and really kind of he planted some seeds in me that came to fruition later. And so I got out of prison, got involved in Buddhism again, which I had been doing while I was in prison as well.
Brian, one question about prison that I want to ask before you go on to the next stage. I mean, you were studying, the spiritual life, you were being I don't know what you call it, an aspirant in different temples. And then you got into prison because I assume it's for selling drugs, right? You got caught for that?
I actually went to prison. I ended up committing a series of bank robberies.
Oh my God!
Where
Wow.
Yeah, I was on the run from the police, and I was really kind of at my wit's end. At that point, I had stopped taking drugs, and I was very much ready to become part of normal society, but I had these open warrants because of my drug activity. And, my family was pleading with me to turn myself in and just to, get on and accept the consequences of my actions. But I was too terrified of going to prison. I was too scared to turn myself in. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I was very desperate to try to get enough money to start a new life. And in my mind, I thought, I'm going to rob some banks, I'm going to get a bunch of cash, and I'm going to leave the country. And I'm going to just try to start my life over, because I've destroyed my life here. And so I went into some banks in Austin, Texas with a note saying, this is a stick up, give me the money and no one get hurt.
Wow.
I got away with it the first two times. No. Yeah, I just said, I made the threat by saying, give me the money and no one gets hurt.
I see.
I never had a weapon. I definitely didn't want to hurt anybody, didn't want to be doing that.
You just wanted to get out of the warrant situation. You wanted to get out of the country.
I just wanted to try to start my life over. I couldn't see a way out of the chains I had forged for myself. I couldn't.
Wow.
I couldn't just step forward and accept the consequences. I just wasn't that man yet. And so I got away with it twice. And on the third time, they put a tracker in the money, and they tracked me back to the place where I was, and they arrested me. And then I was sentenced to 10 years in prison. I did 6 years in prison. I made parole, and I did 4 years, got out and did my 4 years on parole. And then that's been like almost 10 years ago at this point. So yeah, that's how I went to prison.
Oh, sorry, my mic was off. That leads to my question I wanted to ask about the prison experience, because you came from this sort of spiritual background. Going to prison, you're around a lot of rough people that maybe don't have those inclinations. I mean, how would you manage as somebody like that in a prison environment? I mean, did you just stay away from those guys and try to find more like intellectual types and stick to yourself? Or, how do you manage?
It was very difficult. I mean, I grew up, a white middle-class kid from the suburbs, and you're immediately, my charges were very serious. So I started out in maximum security prisons and jails in Texas, which are, very harsh, very violent, gang kingdoms, for lack of a better word. And I honestly really didn't know how to be or to exist. And luckily some older guys and some really kind of tough, dangerous guys recognized me as a thinker. And I also I think it was the first time I had prayed in a long time as the bus was pulling into prison.
Wow.
I just prayed, like, please let me conduct myself in a way that will not bring shame to my father or to my father's father or to my father's father's father. Like, let me either die here or live here as an honorable person. And I tried my best to live that way
Wow.
in prison. And prison in a certain sense is kind of a warrior society, and that kind of attempt at integrity is respected even amongst people who are
Wow,
by
yeah, that's
all
true. Yeah, yeah.
measures bad people.
Everyone's got a heart in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I definitely knew a lot of people that were involved in gangs, but I never formally got involved in gangs. But I became what they would call like a speaker for unaffiliated white people. So for like white guys who hadn't joined any particular gang, but who were also kind of stand-up guys, who would take care of themselves and take care of each other. Uh, uh, like the groups, or the way it works in Texas prisons is the groups kind of group themselves together and elect someone to kind of speak for them and try to deal with the internal politics of prison. And so at the unit I was on, I was one of the people who did that for the white people who hadn't joined any of the kind of like white gangs. And that's basically how I survived. I just tried to carry myself as an honorable person, and
Wow.
it's surprising. I mean, maybe it's surprising. I guess it shouldn't be, but I actually met a lot of like deep intellects in prison, and people who
Wow.
were, the people that you find in prison who are trying to better themselves in that situation are
Sure.
doing anything and everything they can to make that happen. So they're exploring philosophy, religion, meditation, prayer. I mean, and they're not exploring it in the ways that most people do out here as kind of like a hobby, but it's, they are doing it to survive. And so I met quite a few people and had some very, very deep friends who were very, very spiritual men. One of my best friends in there was the leader of the Muslim community where I was, a very, very spiritual man, older than me, and kind of took me under his wing in a lot of ways, and helped me navigate some very rough situations, and mentored me in a lot of ways. And so I met a lot of people like that when I was in there, and I had very strong family support. And I mentioned my grandmother, like if I would write her and ask her for a book on any subject that had to do with spirituality, she would immediately go out and buy it and mail it in to me. And when I was in jail and you couldn't get books, my dad and my mom would get the books that I would want, and they would tear the pages out of the books and mail them to me in letters. And I would be reading books like 10 pages at a time, just like loose leaf pages, and sharing them with other people. So I had a lot of support from my family, in that they would send me any study material that I wanted that was attempting to make something better out of myself. We formed a meditation group at one point that met once or twice a week. I would go to religious services that I found interesting. I would seek out, like one unit I was on had a pretty strong Jewish community, and I sought out the Jewish members of that community and tried to learn what I could from them and how they were living their lives. And I had friends who were Christian pastors, and I mentioned my Muslim friend, and I just tried every way I could to use that as the place to resurrect myself. And I guess I was lucky in that or blessed or whatever, ended up in a lot of places where there were a group of people attempting to do the same.
Wow. I mean, prison and getting in trouble with the law or doing something that you'd regret is sort of an existential fear for a lot of people, even people that think, oh, well, I'll never do anything wrong, I'll never get in trouble. But accidents happen, passions flare up, people do things they really regret, and sometimes for the rest of their lives. So, I mean, I feel like that's sort of a fear in the background that, any of us could do bad.
Sure.
In this world, no matter how righteous we think we are, or how perfect we think we are, or how far away from that we think we are. it can happen, and when it does, it's an awful experience. I bet you've gone through a lot because of that. I mean, do you feel like you've gotten over it, or do you still have a lot of regrets? Or, I mean, how do you deal with that sort of emotional aspect of what happened?
You know, I definitely have regrets. I think one of the biggest regrets in my life is I feel like that my father in particular, who was from very poor Tennessee, you know, working class family,
Sure.
um, and you know, but was drafted to Vietnam, went to Vietnam, and came back and went to college. And my father just, you know, dedicated his life to my mother, my sister, and myself, and trying to build a world for us that did not have the struggles that he went through. And one of the things I conceptualize in my mind is that, like, my father was just trying to hand me, you know, the keys to the kingdom, and I just batted them away like a fool. You know, I
Yeah.
didn't recognize the wisdom and struggle that, you know,
Teenagers.
yeah, totally, that
Yeah.
my family had done. I didn't respect it. You
Yeah.
know, I didn't.
Right.
um,
You thought you knew better than them
Absolutely,
in a
absolutely.
way.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, yes. And I definitely, you know, I definitely still live with that regret, and you know, have asked for and been given forgiveness and continue to
That's wonderful.
I guess kind of seek it on the, you know, on the inward level. But something that's beautiful about the prison experience is that in a lot of ways it just burns all of your past to ash, you know, and you
Right.
kind of come out. And I used to joke when I first got out and was really kind of struggling to get on my feet, that it was like, you know what, as long as I am not a heroin addict who is robbing banks, I am succeeding in the eyes of my family. You know, like,
That's
no matter
great.
what
Wow. Wow.
I'm
Wow.
doing,
So you start
I am
off with a real low
succeeding.
bar. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's really a humble place to be, but it's also a beautiful place to be. And I think it's a place that a lot of people don't get to experience, where kind of all expectations of you have been, you know, burnt to the ground,
Mm.
and you get to kind of remake yourself in the eyes of your community and your
Mm.
family and your tribe and yourself, and, you know, like that.
Wow. So, okay. So, I guess describe what happened like after you got out of prison. How did you get back into spiritual things? And did you continue with that after prison, or did you go deeper,
Yeah,
or?
I did. I got very involved with Vajrayana Buddhism, which is like tantric Tibetan Buddhism. I became part of a modern Vajrayana lineage called the Aro tradition, and I was basically in seminary, on track to become the equivalent of a Buddhist priest in Vajrayana Buddhism, and was studying that and practicing that for years and years and years, and going to retreats, and, you know, had a teacher, and was also involved in a Western occult chaos magic organization, and was participating in that, and was doing that for many, many years. And then I kind of joke with people that the culmination of all of my Buddhist training and experience, which, you know, in theory is supposed to be the realization of anatman, or no self, or that, you know, transitory nature of what we think of as the soul, that there's not really this divine spark that exists, that it's, you know, just the accumulated aggregates of, you know, the five sense fields and things like that. I actually had completely the opposite realization. I had the realization that the soul does exist, that it actually is what is looking through my eyes and hearing through my ears right now.
Mhm.
It is eternal, and it is linked to the eternal. I had that experience, and I had the, you know, what in the West they call the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, in a very profound period of about 5 days of intense meditation after having a shoulder surgery and being forced to just kind of sit on my butt. And uh, and to my utter dismay and confusion, the holy guardian angel kicked me right to Christianity. which made absolutely no
Wow.
sense to me. I
Right, because that was the
never,
thing you were moving furthest away from in your own mind, right? Going into
absolutely.
religion and everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I had all of the critiques that a intelligent, middle class, liberally educated person has of their, native spiritual tradition. And, but it was just absolutely apparent to me that I had to find a way to come to terms with that tradition and with my religion. And, um, in the way that the holy guardian angel experience has evolved for me is that it seems that the angel puts the next thing that I need to be doing right in front of me, right when it needs to happen. And right around that time, I discovered Jordan Peterson and his psychological significance of the Bible lecture series, which is, if you haven't listened to them, they're really great. I recommend them to everybody. And they really kind of present a Jungian view of Christianity, which actually helped me be able to make sense of what was happening to me. And from there, since I was a kid, like I said, I wanted to be a Shaolin monk. I've always wanted to live a, kind of a initiated, ordained religious life. And I very quickly discovered the independent sacramental movement and the French Gnostic revival and the Gnostic church. And it turned out that a friend of mine that I had known in Texas was a priest in one of these lineages. And so I sought out and received ordination from him. And by this time I had moved to North Carolina, had gone through a divorce, had met the woman of my dreams in North Carolina, and started a small Gnostic church here. I also had been wanting to be a Mason, since I got out of prison, because I had met this Mason when I was in prison, but I was just terrified that the Masons would not accept me as a felon. And, a lot of research I saw online led me to believe that that was just a definite no-go. And so I just never applied. I have family Masonic links, and I really wanted to be involved with Masonry, both for its place in the Western esoteric tradition, and I wanted to connect with this spiritual tradition of my grandfathers, that my father and my father's generation hadn't kept on. There was like this gap in each side of my family, but before that they were Masons, and I wanted to pick that back up, but I just thought I would never be accepted. And then one day my fiance and I were walking around here in Asheville, and there's a just beautiful Masonic lodge it's kind of like the cornerstone of the town. It's a beautiful 3-story brick building that was built to be a lodge. It has these very impressive columns in front, and
Oh, wow. I love that.
symbols all over them. And I was telling her how I'd always wanted to be a Mason, and she's lived in this town for over 20 years and, has gone to many events at the Masonic Temple, like people renting out the space and stuff. And
Sure.
And she was like, you should just go. You should just go.
Yeah, it's worth trying,
go and apply.
You never know.
Yeah. And so I went to a dinner, an open dinner, and met some of the brothers, and really, resonated with them, and got a petition and filled it out, and was just completely honest on my application with my past. And was just like, I told myself in my mind, the way I constructed it, and maybe this is arrogant, but I was like, if these people don't accept me, they have misunderstood Masonry, because Masonry should be about,
forgiveness,
fixing that rough stone, and
right. And also forgiveness. And all, I think that, this is just my perspective, but I think that, every case is different. You can't just broad brush. Anybody with any criminal record can never be a Mason. I think that's just not, there's no nuance in that way of thinking, and every case is different. You have all throughout history people that have been the worst criminals or prostitutes or whatever that have become saints later in life. Yeah. And if Masonry is not allowing saints to join, then I think there is a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And so I filled out my petition, and then the investigative committee came to my house, and basically explained everything that I've just explained to you, and in detail, and was like, and I told them, I was like, I'm very nervous that you guys are going to, reject me for this. And they said, we did just what you said. We take things on a case by case basis. This is not an automatic rejection. And
that's right.
so,
I
waited for the
change also, right? People change. And
hopefully,
you've obviously
yes.
changed.
Yeah, I definitely have
Thank
changed.
God for that.
Yes, definitely. Thank God for that. And so they voted yes on my petition, and I became an entered apprentice, and I'm an entered apprentice now. And I think
Congratulations.
I actually, next Thursday, I'm returning my entered apprentice catechism. And then I think the week after that, we're doing an outdoor fellowcraft degree. So
what a story, man. What a story. Wow. So really rich experiences. So I guess we can go into some of the Gnostic stuff at this point. I mean, okay, first of all, you have a podcast, right, about Gnosticism. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you did there.
Yeah, I have a podcast called Modern Gnostic that people can find it if they want on Spotify and iTunes and all the things. And it's basically just me kind of talking about my thoughts on modern manifestations of Gnosticism and what it means to be a modern Gnostic. I sometimes have guests on the show. I want to start having more guests on the show. Usually, though, it's just me talking about this. I kind of have two projects I consider myself working on. One is this modern Gnosticism, because I feel that it's very important to the West right now and to our culture that we get a handle on and a re-initiation into the Judeo-Christian experience and religious tradition. I feel like it's very important. And I feel like what I conceptualize as modern Gnosticism presents a way for a certain subset of people, largely in my experience, it's fellow occultists and fellow kind of spiritual freaks, that Gnosticism gives a way for us to relate to the tradition of our forefathers, the Jewish and Christian and even Islamic tradition that have built the West. And then along with this project, I have something else that I'm conceptualizing as esoteric patriotism, because I feel like our Western society and culture in general.
And I like that, esoteric patriotism.
Yeah. And so this is the idea that a patriotism for the esoteric ideas that I feel like lay at the root of the American experiment. And I feel that this is deeply connected with Freemasonry, and that Masonry kind of acts as a treasure house or a vault of the esoteric and religious symbolism that can give rise to the ideas of the divine sovereign nature of the individual, the spiritual equality of all beings, the proper relationship of the individual to the state and to the collective, the way these things should function. I think that from the small amount that I've experienced Masonry and the degree that I've studied it, I feel it's very much mirrored and present in the working of the lodge, and that we could be standing on the precipice of a revival of, I think we're in the midst of it actually,
we are
a revival of esoteric Masonry and a way of people relating to it as a living tradition.
Yeah. And okay, so maybe a lot of people watching might not know a lot about Gnosticism. So I don't know how, I mean, there's a lot of different specific questions I have, but maybe start off with just the basics of Gnosticism 101. Like, what is it like if you had to give an explanation to somebody in an elevator quickly, what's Gnosticism? What's your elevator speech around Gnosticism?
Yeah, that's a good question. The primary thing that I like to focus, because I guess one of the first things is that people who do have some understanding about Gnosticism generally want to try to figure out, what ancient school of Gnosticism is your church doing, or what ancient school of Gnosticism are you fitting into? And that's really not my emphasis or area of expertise. To me, the way I conceptualize modern Gnosticism is, the teachings and the practices and the path and the quest of attempting to have a direct, real, alive, revelatory experience of self and divine, and the relationship between self and divine. Like that's how I would characterize Gnosticism. And I think that from the perspective, the historical perspective or the ancient perspective, I think it's very eye-opening for people who have, particularly people like me who are raised in the South and who, only have this one very typically narrow view of Christianity, to realize that in the ancient world, Christianity was synonymous with Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and Kabbalah and ritual magic. And it was not just limited to this very, kind of how it gets presented in the South is, do you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? Yes, I do. Okay, boom, you're good. Right. And for a lot of people that works, and that's wonderful, and it's beautiful, and I see it in my family, and I have immense respect and reverence for it. It
leads to good moral and ethical behavior in life, and for some people, that's their means to improve themselves, and that's fine.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for other people, that's not enough. It's not enough.
Like, if you think too much and you're a little cuckoo like me and you're going to want more.
Right.
Ask tough questions, and you need answers.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think, like, in the Christian world, or in all religious traditions, you have the exoteric level at the surface, which is kind of like what we just described, or, whatever, like, if you go become a Muslim, what does it mean to become a Muslim? Well, I say, I accept there is only one God but Allah, and Muhammad is a prophet. Boom, boom. You said the magic words, you're good. If you're going to be a Jew, well, why is a Jew? Well, my mom's a Jew, so I'm a Jew, so boom, you're good. Like, that's kind of like the surface level of it. But then there's this deeper esoteric level that interprets all of this stuff symbolically and archetypally, and seeks to, not just exist at the level of belief, but is seeking experience. And I feel like, in the writings of the ancient Gnostics, we kind of have, we have that esoteric tradition we can look at.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I view modern Gnosticism, is an attempt for me to engage with the symbols and rites and sacramental nature of, Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, from a deep level of seeking direct inner experience.
Right, and on the deeper side, I mean, from my understanding of Gnosticism, it's an emanationist idea, similar to the Kabbalah, where you have, the God that's mysterious and way far removed in some sense, that emanates out creation, and then the final sort of crown of creation is man, somehow,
right.
Or human beings, right? What are your thoughts on that whole emanationist idea?
I think that, so I like to, I'm trying to think of where this quote comes from. It's the guy who developed general semantics, but the clever quip that the map is not the territory, and
like all models
now
they're helpful, but they fail in the end.
Sure. Or, like here in the Appalachian Mountains, if you go out hiking and maybe you have a general map, but you get way out in the wilderness, and it's kind of helpful to have multiple, more detailed maps and different ways of navigating. And so I take these things like theory of emanation, or when people talk about, I think kind of the two main maps that seem to be present in both the ancient and modern Gnosticism, the idea that, the earth is like a prison planet, right? That's been created by this fallen or evil God, and, that it's surrounded by these archons that are attempting to keep man in this lower nature that is not our true state, right? That's one kind of worldview. And there's another worldview.
Yaldabaoth or whatever, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then there's another view that this is all paradise. This is the spiritual world that we just kind of have blinders on, right? And when we kind of wake up to what the true nature of things is, it'll all be perfect. I see those as two maps that I use depending on kind of how my day's going. Like there's definitely times when this feels like a prison planet, and you can definitely, I think you can look and see, particularly in modern politics, archonic forces that seem to be attempting to keep
Yeah.
humankind in subservience and slavery.
So what
it's
are the archons? What are the archons? People might not know what you mean when you say archonic forces.
So I believe in Greek, archon just kind of meant like a bureaucratic administrator, like part of the government, some kind of low to mid-level, bureaucrat that could make your life problematic. In ancient Gnosticism, the archons were, depending on the myth, they were spiritual forces often associated with the stars and the constellations, that kept humankind imprisoned. So these were kind of like the hating angels that it talks about in Jewish and Christian mythology, that were resentful of the elevated nature of humankind and resentful.
So they tried to keep us up all the time.
Right, and they tried to keep us in a fallen state.
Right.
This is probably beating a dead horse, but it's relevant nonetheless. I think like the original, at least the first Matrix movie, was a very good expression of a modern Gnostic myth. And, Agent Smith would be kind of like the archonic forces, attempting to keep man locked into the illusion of,
right.
The day to day.
And so Brian, in another sense, these sort of dark angels or demons or whatever, or archons that are trying to keep us down, in a way they're serving God also. Some would say that they're serving God's bigger purpose of giving us challenges so that we can overcome them. And it's in that process of overcoming these difficulties of life that are perhaps provided by these darker forces that our soul actually grows and wisdom can blossom. So there's a positive spin potentially, I would assume, to some of these negative influences. Have you heard about that or thought about that perspective?
I mean, I've definitely thought about it. I think that's definitely a good way of thinking about it. There's an old prayer that samurais supposedly would say, where they would actually pray for obstacles to be put in their path, for that very reason, so that it could, increase their strength and make them stronger. I think in a lot of the ancient Gnostic myths, though, these were seen as, straight up malevolent forces who were the servants of a malevolent divinity, and that beyond that divinity, there was the true God.
The true God, right?
Christ, like, slid in, like the Christ broke into prison
to literally save us from
breaking everybody out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sort of wake us up. Hey guys, this is an illusory world. You've been trapped down here. You need to wake up, listen to me. We need to get out of here. Yeah.
And there's this, I think this interesting concept of it being tied to the stars and to the constellations. So, a lot of people are into astrology and like, well, I'm a Sagittarius and this means this, and on this day things are like this. And from the ancient Gnostic perspective, it's like, no. You need to escape that. Like, we are attempting to escape fate. Like, fate is of the network of the prison, and we're attempting to escape that fate.
That's right. Exactly.
Break free of it.
And that was similar with Mithraism. Was the idea that, the ultimate thing was to go beyond destiny, go beyond fate, and go beyond the control and the influence the planets wield over us. And some would say that that's why Mithra was sacrificing that bull, because that was the age they were in of Taurus. It was a Taurian processional age. And so that age of Taurus sort of symbolized all those fatalistic forces of destiny, sort of the planets and the angels and the demons sort of determining our direction and our course. And the idea of slaying that bull was very symbolic of slaying fatalism and the control of all these external forces on us, and being able to transcend that and be truly free.
Yeah, it's, one of the things I've talked about on the podcast, and I very much conceptualize part of my modern Gnostic project, is how, like you're just explaining with Mithraism, and you see some of these same ideas in Zoroastrianism, and you see some of these same ideas in early Vedic thought. And one of the pieces that's kind of been falling into place for me is that, like, these are deep Indo-Aryan myth cycles
Yes.
that show up in all the manifestations of the religions of these ancient people that most of us of Judeo-Christian background are lineal descendants of. And I think that that's one of the reasons that it is so powerful and so important to kind of make our I want to say make our peace, but it's way more than just making our peace. Like, making your peace with the tradition is perhaps the first step, but you have to do even more than that. You have to become active in the tradition. But I feel like it unlocks something in us that is like, I like to say my Christianity is way older than anything that was ever called Christianity, or anyone who was ever called Jesus, or any, this stuff is ancient, Epic of Gilgamesh, ancient stuff that's very potent and very powerful. And I feel like it's attempting to bust through the surface right now. So as you know, I've recently been involved in Martinism, and I think that Martinism is one of the most potent forms of this tradition currently right now. And it is you can see, particularly through the work of the OMS, and the way that it is pushing into the culture. It's pushing into the world, and if you interact with it, it is so alive, and it is so ready to have contact with mankind, and to open and unveil itself, because
Right.
I feel like we're in such need of it right now. The world is in such need of this right now.
It's true, and it is emerging, and it's happening all over the place in so many different ways. And I even see it, like, on my Facebook popping up, recommended friends, and they're all looking like the most far out, deep people I've ever seen. I'm like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Is everyone suddenly changing, or am I changing? And then the friends I get, they're friends with these kinds of people, and now I'm getting all these recommendations for friends with magic wands, and it's very fascinating. But I love it. I mean, it's just great. I mean, because I think, obviously you only get the sort of lessons and the revelations that you're ready for in life. And if you're not afraid for profound stuff, it will come to you. But if you are afraid, it's almost like the compassion of God doesn't want to overwhelm, because that wouldn't be good for your vessel. And, you don't want to lose your mind or something, or end up with some kind of disability. So everything has to come in due time. And it really depends on your readiness, for this stuff. And it takes years and years to become ready. It's not something that can magically be, you can magically be prepared overnight or something. So it does, it's a long, long journey. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the whole sacred vowels thing. I'm really interested in the vowels. And I know in the Nag Hammadi library of some of these Gnostic scriptures, they talk about the vowels, they talk about EIO. I got interested in the vowels some years back. I think I was living in Mali in West Africa at the time. And it was probably 2008. I got some work in Ethiopia from Mali, and I would go to Ethiopia for like 1-2 months at a time. And then I'd come back, and I went back and forth 3 times for this job I was doing in Ethiopia. And while I was there, I was also studying, some Gnostic stuff, and I just got interested in the vowels. And I think there's a quote in one of the Gnostic scriptures where Jesus says something like, that's something to the effect of, that's very sacred, but nothing's more sacred than the vowels. And I was struck by that. I'm like, wow, he said nothing's more sacred than the vowels. Well, then we need to look into the vowels. And then, I found out that, all the ancient religious languages, whether it's Hebrew or Sanskrit, and I think even Arabic, in the past didn't include vowels because they were too sacred to be written down. And that was all oral tradition, and you had to sort of know the oral, how things were read, to be able to interpret what the vowels were properly in these ancient scriptures. And I also read some stuff about there being 7 sacred vowels, and I tried doing research into what's the authentic pronunciation, like, perhaps what was pronunciation in the times of ancient Egypt. The closest I can get is to ancient Greek pronunciation. So I started researching to find out, how do I say this vowel right? because the
Right.
idea was also that I was exploring is that the chanting of these sacred vowels may have been done in like the King's Chamber or in the pyramids at one time in unison. So you'd have people, one person would take one vowel, another person take one vowel, or
Right.
maybe a group of people would take one vowel, another group would take, and if all 7 were chanted together, it would create sort of the glory or the majesty of the Lord, the sound.
Right.
And so I started, when I was in Ethiopia, I started doing recordings of the vowel sounds. And basically what I did is a multi-track thing. And I recorded my own voice chanting these vowels and layered them. And I remember when I first did the first 2 vowels and I listened to how it sounded, it was already like, holy shit. It sounds like Om, but like even more powerful. And by the time I layered all 7 vowels, it was like the most powerful kind of full Om sound, much fuller than just Om by itself. Like it sounded like the thunder of the heavens, and it was an awesome sound. It was almost frightening. And so that's the sound you hear in the beginning of the Just Masons episodes and the end. If you hear that,
Oh, cool.
That's me doing the 7 vowels together. So anyway, so I'm very interested in the vowel sounds, and I actually had a chance to go to Egypt, and I visited the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. And I was lucky because it was at a time where there had just been like a terrorist attack of some tourists and stuff. And I went like the day after that. And so it was dead. And I went there early in the morning. I had a good tour guide who's part of some esoteric tours, an Egyptian woman who's worked with some pretty famous people in Egypt. And so she did a custom tour with me. I got to be in there alone. I was just lucky. There was just happening nobody at that time. I climbed up the thing, went into the king. Hang on, buddy. Can you hang on 1 second? My son needs some help.
Yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
right back. Sorry about that. So I'll edit that out. So anyway, I was, so I got lucky and went into the King's Chamber, and I was alone in there. And I'll tell you that the echo, the resonance in that chamber, I've never, ever experienced anything like that in my life. It is beyond belief. I mean, so what I started doing, ended up being almost a half hour alone in the King's Chamber.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. Nobody was coming up. So I took advantage, and I felt like any sound I made or a prayer I made went off into eternity from inside of there. Like it would just keep resonating, and it would just get slowly quieter and quieter and quieter, but I felt like it never stopped. It just maybe went outside of my perception, but it was still resonating into the universe through the King's Chamber. So I took advantage, and I prayed, very genuinely, for the world, for my family, for me to improve as a person. And I also tried chanting the vowels. I chanted each vowel by itself, and it was just powerful. The sound was so much resonance, inside that room. And I recorded them too. I recorded when I was chanting the vowels, and I still have it. I mean, if you hear it, you're going to be like, holy shit, that sounds powerful.
I'd love to hear it.
So highly recommend chanting the vowels in the King's Chamber if you ever get in there alone. And do some prayers, because I think it's like an area of extreme projection of resonance when you're in there. But anyway, so that's a little intro to the vowels. And what are your thoughts on the vowels? Do you know about this IAO that's in the Gnostic tradition? And yeah,
absolutely. It's interesting if you look in. You mentioned the Nag Hammadi stuff. There's in some of the scriptures, you'll just see long chains of nothing but vowels, and these were the secret, words that would allow you to pass past kind of like the gates of the stars, the various rings of kind of prison wire around the planet, and these different combinations of vowels would like unlock the thing. And in some of the Gnostic myths, that's what the Christ came and transmitted, were these secret words that would allow you to pass.
Wow.
It's weird that it's interesting, not weird, it's interesting that you bring this up, because this morning I was reading, Piers Vaughan has a translation of Robert Ambeland's History of Martinism. And in the end, there's an appendix section where Robert Ambeland is writing about the different names of God. And I'm just going to read them to you because I wrote down some of these quotes this morning while I was studying. The first one is from Irenaeus, the church father who actually persecuted a lot of the Gnostics.
That's right.
But historians say he was very, very accurate in how he described what the Gnostics were doing and what they were teaching. And so this one doesn't have to do so much with the vowels, but it's good. Irenaeus says that at the end of Gnostic initiations, the initiate would respond to the priest, "I am confirmed and redeemed. I redeem my soul from this world and the things of this world in the name of Iao, who redeemed the soul of the world for salvation in the living Christ." And then Clement of Alexandria wrote that Iao means, so he was another church father, that Iao means he who was, who is, and who shall be. He quotes another church father, and this is a kind of long quote, but he's in this quote, the church father is quoting from the Oracle of Apollo. He says, "Say that the highest of the gods, the supreme God, is Iao, the Iao of the Oracle of Apollo." This is the solar divinity. It is him who in winter is called Aureus, in spring Zeus, Helios in the summer, and in autumn the Eonguid Iao. In fact, it is the sun, which is the god type of all the Semites. And then from that same church father, he says, "The Chaldeans called the supreme god Iao, that is to say, intelligible light. In the Phoenician language, he is often called Sabaoth, as being he who is above the seven heavens." So he who's, the real God past all of the illusion. That is to say, the creator of the world. And so, yeah, it's definitely there in the vowels. And I would say when you were talking about like trying to research how to say them correctly, right? I think in my experience and the way that I would teach this to people is that like when you were doing it in the chamber and you listen to it later and in the moment it feels like it's resonating to the heavens, like at that moment you were pronouncing it correctly. Like there's no, you won't find, I don't think, or I haven't found a correct pronunciation done in a book. But if you sit down for the next 6 months and each morning, there's a meditation I did for probably the last 2 years. And every morning would sit down and vibrate at the top of the head in kind of a middle pillar fashion, the E, and then draw down the light into the heart, the Ah, and then all the way down into the feet, the O, and then just circulate that repeatedly, the Iao, the Iao, the Iao. Israel Regardie talks about like, you'll know you're doing it right when you can feel it vibrating in your extremities, in the palms of your hands, and the soles of your feet. You start to get this experience, like you said, of it extending out into the heavens and beyond. And I think this is what you've had our brother Paul Reyna on here, and he talks about like learning to transmit spiritual energy. I think in my experience, in the way this has been revealed to me in practice, is that once you get that vibration going and it starts vibrating in the palms of your hand, is when you can start transmitting and pulling in and receiving and being kind of in Gnosticism it's talking about like we are supposed to be the conduits for this Christ energy into the world. And in my gnosis, in my experience of this stuff, when you start to get those vowel vibrations really going, is when you're acting as this transmitting station for this power. And back before COVID, when we were still meeting at the church, we would do exactly what you were talking about. We would get together, we would vibrate these things as a group, we would have different people doing different ones. It's very good to have some women and some men doing them differently, because women will inevitably do them very differently than the men are doing them, in my experience. And when you have those two polarized sexual energies doing it again, it creates this like these
Right.
two waves that start bouncing and resonating, which then
Yeah.
like opens up and comes out. And it's a real funny thing. When I first moved to Asheville, I was so skeptical of all the hippie spirituality that's here and all of the kind of new age spirituality that's here, because I've always been involved in very traditional religion things, which tends to look down their nose at new age spirituality. But like, if you live somewhere where there's some kind of new age group and you see that they're doing toning, is what they typically call it, like go check that out if you want to know about the power of these syllables, because the hippies doing toning are hitting into that exact same thing, and they're usually doing it in a circle, and they're usually doing it as a group.
Yeah, I mean, I started, when 2008, when I got into the vowels, I started chanting them pretty much daily. But just as I wanted, throughout the day. Sometimes I'd be reading and I'd be chanting, or, I'll be driving my car and chanting the vowels, or I'll be sitting on the couch chanting. And I ended up gravitating towards particular vowels of the 7 over time. And in my own mind, I was thinking, well, maybe I should just chant the ones that I feel attracted to, because maybe that's where I need more healing or whatever. Because I really felt like they had a calming effect, and almost felt like it was a brain massage, because I could feel the vowels vibrating inside my head. It literally vibrating my head and inside. So I almost felt like it was a massage for the brain somehow to do these vowels. And it also felt like it was a way of transmuting pain and suffering through the sound vibration. So I was also getting out stress and stuff by chanting these vowels. And so I let myself kind of just pick and choose whatever vowel I felt like chanting, chant. Don't put any restrictions on it. If that's the vowel you feel like chanting, then it's the right vowel to be chanting. Yeah. And what I found is over the years, and I've been doing vowel chanting since, like I said, around 2008. I still do them almost every day, just because I need it and I like doing it. I found that actually ended up being ERO that I do now pretty much solely. And I didn't know that until I started looking into ERO. And then I realized, and this was actually more recently, that holy shit, I've been doing ERO but the O I usually do as ooh. And I know there's debate about whether it's O or ooh, they're very similar. But I basically do E, and then I do ah and ooh. As the 3 I like to practice. But I feel like I get a lot of benefits from them. I feel like it's a cleansing thing. It's good for the health.
Definitely.
Good for the mind. It releases the stress. And like I said, it feels like a brain massage when I do it, because it vibrates the skull when you do vowel chanting.
Absolutely. I feel, and you can, there's so many things you can do with it. And I'm sure you've been doing it for a long time, and you've probably experienced these in your own practice, but you can take that feeling you get in your skull, and you can try focusing to attain that same feeling in your heart with the vowel chanting, or in your feet, or in your hands, or you can move it around in different parts of your body. And there's also I found a place that you can reach with doing these things, where you can get that same feeling by inwardly vibrating the vowels, making very little, if any noise at all, which is, there's one of my daily practices is to step outside of work around noon or 1 o'clock every day and say a midday prayer and do a quick Iao or Yeshua or something, some chanting of something sacred. And it really serves to, like you said, to be a cleansing of the stress of the day at that halfway point, and to realign you with your, purpose. It's a very powerful practice.
And it's interesting too, the whole connection with the sun and light. Because vowels are pure vibration. It's sound vibration. And light is a type of vibration, a frequency, as far as I understand. And the sun is the strongest source of light in our known world. Obviously there's other suns and other, universes and, solar systems out there, but we know our sun, that's the one we have an intimate relationship with. It's the closest symbolism to us of light. And, it represents such a fullness of light coming from the sun, and it seems to be eternal. because it just never seems to go out. You don't have to change the battery, or, you know, or the
Right.
bulb doesn't burn out. I mean, it's just this incredible source of, you know, robust, intensive light.
Yeah.
And to think about the vowels, and maybe if E, I, O are the three primary that can be further divided into seven somehow, sort of like the elements and some of the theories of the elements. That maybe EIO is somehow a separation into three from the one of the sun. Somehow, that the ultimate unity of vibration, of holy vibration, is in that illumination of the light of the sun, and it
Yeah.
divides out into vowels somehow. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud at this point, but this is the kind of stuff I like to do.
Yeah, and then you get like the Trinitary
Yeah.
aspect coming in it as well, and I was talking about the kind of root of all of this in ancient Indo-Aryan cultures, which another primary thing is the worship of the sun as the father. You know,
That's
it's
right.
very seldomly. I mean, there are some cultures that have a sun goddess as well, but typically this is the sky father is the big burning nuclear explosion in space
Right.
out there that's providing all of the light and energy, and
You can
it's
see it here in my
definitely
background too. That looks pretty cool.
yeah, absolutely. And that's another one with the with the chanting of vowels. There, I find that like in the early morning when the sun is dawning is a very powerful time to do these practices and to breathe in that power of the sun and exhale out that power of the sun, and becoming, again, like that transmitter of the divine in the world. I don't know if he talked about it when he was on your show, but I've definitely heard him talk about it before. But Brother Timothy Hogan talk about the Sufis chanting the vowels and then kind of like hitting at the throat with the E and then ah at the and like activating these different body centers. And it's such a universal spiritual practice. Like you see it, it seems to show up everywhere. Like every tradition seems to have some version of this vibrating syllables at different, key parts of the body, and kind of turning them on through vibration. And, whether it's 5 centers or 3 centers or 7 centers is kind of irrelevant. The thing that's interesting is that everyone is hitting onto that practice. It's like a human universal almost.
So we got pretty far out here in the conversation, and I know you have some time constraints. So I wanted to talk about one final thing, discipline. Yep. And I know you're a highly disciplined guy these days, and I've been seeing your posts on Facebook, and it always reminds me, I got to get in shape. I got to get this going, man. This guy's looking good, and you're like you're my age, right? Or something like that. 48,
47, going on 48. Yeah, going on 48.
So, and I'm 48, I think. So yeah. So yeah, it's very inspiring. So thanks for posting those, because it does give me a push, and I'm sure it gives a lot of people a push. And I want you to talk about a little bit about how you're framing exercise in a different way.
Yeah. So this was something like I said, I've been involved in martial arts pretty much my whole life. But I really, to circle back to prison, I really discovered in prison how much I thrive under discipline, and how much I saw other men thrive under disciplined regimens of having like a certain way that you do things. And in prison, it was very much revolved around working out and remaining physically strong and able, and able to protect yourself, able to protect your friends, able to be healthy, all of these kinds of things. And so I've always, ever since I got out, have maintained a regiment of working out and trying to stay active and do a lot of jujitsu and lift weights and all of that kind of stuff. And then I've always, or since prison, I see this as integral to the spiritual path. Many spiritual traditions talk about, the body being the temple of God, and you want to have a strong, powerful, usable, healthy vessel for the spirit to inhabit. And I've always seen working out and physical training as an integral part of my spiritual path. But I guess it was going on 90 days ago that some friends at work were like, we want to start working out on a regular basis. And a friend of mine had been following this guy who's in the Marines, who's in active duty. And he was starting this challenge where it was for the month of June, you were going to do 100 burpees every day, no matter what, rain, sleet, or shine, sick, don't want to do it, doesn't matter. You're going to do it. You're not going to drink any alcohol. You're not going to eat any sugar. And this friend of mine at work, he was going from like not working out at all. And he saw this and he's like, I want to do it. And I was like, you know what, man, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to do it with you.
Nice.
But I'm not giving up alcohol. I'll give up the sugar, but I'm not giving up the alcohol. And he was like, that's great, man. I just want someone to, you know, do it with me. We'll have a text where we'll text each other to keep each other encouraged. And then the first day when I did the first set of burpees, I realized I can't be a sissy and not stop the alcohol as well. Like I gotta cut. I can't look at myself in the mirror. The guy I told you that I met in prison who was a Mason, one of the things he told me that's always stuck to me, he was like, you have to look yourself in the mirror every morning. That's the person that you can't fool, you know, like you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning. And I realized if I didn't stop the alcohol, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror every morning. So I got on board with all that. We started doing 100 burpees every day, no matter what, getting up, doing it. And I decided that I wanted to do it first thing in the morning, because if I waited late in the day, then, you know, I could be too tired, or I could come up with an excuse not to do it, or something could get in the way, or, you know, who knows what can happen later in the day. So I was like, you know, I'm going to make myself get up 45 minutes earlier than I normally do so I can do my burpees. And I'm not going to have alcohol. I'm not going to have sugar. And I was already in shape and pretty healthy, but the alcohol, I mean, the sugar, taking the sugar away just immediately melted off some excess fat that I was carrying and made me feel so much better. And then the quitting the alcohol, and I wasn't drinking much. I was having like maybe 2 glasses of wine in the evening, but taking away that alcohol did so much for my sleep. My sleep got so much better. And so I just kind of naturally started wanting to wake up earlier every morning. And then I was like, you know what, if I wake up an hour early, I can do my exercise and I'll have time to read and write, and I can do my spiritual study, you know? Sure. So I would get up, I would do my exercise, or I would get up, I would do about 30 minutes of meditation and prayer, do my exercise, and then I had some time to read. Well, the month ended and there were like 4 other coworkers who were like, hey, we want to get on this too. You know, so we were like, let's just keep going. Let's just do another month. And we just kept going with that same thing. And then pretty soon the next month came, and there's like 10 of us now from my job who are like, I want to keep doing it. Like so me and the original guy, we still haven't taken a day off. We've just been rolling with either burpees or something every single day. And I've kept up the no alcohol and no sugar, just mainly because the sleep's gotten so good. And, you know, wake up early, and give myself the chance to really have some time to study, to write, to think, to pray, to meditate. And then I realized in the middle of all of this, it's like, wow, my entered apprentice initiation is really coming to fruition because I'm using the working tools. I'm dividing my time. I'm using my 24-inch gauge.
Right.
I really am.
Gauge. Yeah, it's so much about time management.
It really is. And it's one of the things Jordan Peterson talks about, you know, like incremental change pays vast dividends. You know, you make these little bitty changes in your life and it starts to make everything so much better in little ways that you wouldn't even expect. And I've just kind of known for a long time to give oneself a disciplined regimen of exercise and spiritual practice will just make your life so much better. There's a Navy SEAL guy I really like, Jocko Willink, and he talks about discipline equals freedom. And it's a catchy little saying. It's very, very true. I waking up super early in the morning, not drinking, not eating sugar, and working out every day has given me so much free time, so much more quality time with my partner. I'm so much more engaged with work. I'm reading in a dedicated way. I find myself much more plugged in, you know, with my life in every kind of way. And part of this, and it's one of the things that Brother Hill was talking about, is, you know, not being too tight with things. And I think it's kind of important to realize that like slip ups are part of it. You're going to slip up. The main thing is to just get back up and keep going. But I think particularly for for men, and for, there's a lot in the mythology of Masonry that's connected with knighthood and spiritual knighthood, and this is there in Martinism as well, and it's definitely there in the French Gnostic revival and myths of the Templars and all of this kind of stuff. And I take that stuff very seriously because I've always been very tuned in and turned on to the warrior ethos, and if you're going to be a knight, you have to be able to fight. You have to be strong. You have to be able. You have to be capable. To manifest the archetype of the divine masculine in the world. These are things you have to do.
So how did this come into your idea of recreation? I think that's what you call it.
Well, what I started noticing is I would get home from work. So I would do my burpees in the morning, and then I would go to work, and then I would get home from work, and I have a pretty physical job, and I would get home and I would feel tired, and I felt like all I wanted to do was just take a nap and then wake up and have dinner and watch TV.
Netflix and chill.
Absolutely. Which I still do. I love to do.
Right.
But what I found is if I came home and did another workout, just something, maybe go for a jog or lift some weights or swing the kettlebell or whatever it is, that my energy levels would be completely transformed. At the end of that workout, I didn't want to nap anymore. I didn't want to just be lazy. I wanted to cook dinner with my fiance and hang out and eat together and talk about our day and find a show we want to watch together and have some good sleep. And I was like, wow, recreation. What is that? Let's break this word down. Recreate. I'm recreating myself when I do this. I'm plugging myself back into the man that I want to be, by this very simple act. And I'll as I'm carrying.
The Ashler analogy can come into play here too, that you're chipping away at your rough edges, that fat, that, cancerous growth or whatever it may be that needs to go. You're recreating yourself, you're sculpting yourself.
Absolutely. And shoot, 3 out of 7 days or 4 out of 7 days, I'll be carrying my kettlebells into my backyard, just saying, I'm so tired, I don't want to do this. Maybe I should take it easy today. Maybe today I need a day off. You should really not push yourself too hard, Brian. Maybe you really deserve a day off. And I'm still saying that as I'm starting to do my routine, but 5 minutes into it, all of that is gone. And then at the end of the workout,
an initial hurdle of just start. Once you
just got to move,
get warmed up, then it's okay again.
Absolutely. And you never, in my experience, at the end of the workout, I'm never thinking, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. I really wish I would have just laid down and looked at Twitter.
Never think.
I really wish I would. Never. No, you always feel great.
You're always happy you did it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
absolutely.
True, man.
So it's one of the things that one of the things I've been working with my working tools is my relationship with social media and trying to get away from a lot of Twitter. And I joke a lot that I'm kind of like a social media whore because I'm posting so much on Instagram and Facebook, but it's really amazing how many people have, people I work with, people I'm friends with in town, people that I just know from Facebook, from other parts of the country that I've never physically met, who in the last series of months have reached out to me and said, hey, I started working out. I've been seeing your posts. It's so inspiring. Thank you for posting them on there.
Yes.
And it also keeps me accountable because, again, I'm publicly saying that I'm doing this stuff. Exactly. I feel foolish. And that keeps me motivated as well. And it's kind of a interesting way to find a positive side to the social media thing. If you can use it to, inspire people spiritually, inspire people to try to better themselves, to be better people. I think it's a good tool. So that's what I've been doing.
Absolutely. So what's your secret for your upper legs? I mean, that's one thing I've remarked in your video. Your thighs, both the front and back hamstrings are very well developed. Is that, you think, a little bit of genetics there, or have you been doing specific things for your legs that have created your upper legs to be so good? You have great upper legs.
Thank you. That's pretty recent, and I think it's from since COVID. I haven't been able to go to like Gold's Gym, which I was going to Gold's Gym and doing squats, like at the squat rack with heavy weights, which is what I always thought would develop these things. But since I've been at home, all I have is my kettlebells, and I have a 100-pound sandbag that I bought recently. And so I just do a lot of squats with kettlebells and with the
I see.
sandbag, and I just do, hundreds of squats a week and lunges. And
You do a
here
lot
in
of
North
leg
Carolina,
exercises. Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
hills here. So I run hills once a week, maybe more.
Right.
Just do a lot of leg stuff. Something with working out that I've found is, like, if you concentrate on your lower body a lot, it tends to translate everywhere. It's such a large muscle group, that it leads to gains in other places. And picking up and squatting heavy stuff just feels good. And I love doing it with the kettlebells. I love doing it with the sandbag, the 100-pound sandbag. It's just something very primal and satisfying to me about scooping something up off the ground and, throwing it on your shoulder and
Yeah.
squatting with it, or walking with it, or lunging with it, or,
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of, when I do work out, I always like to use natural movements and natural work movements, and that the body would normally do, and not awkward, modern exercises. But just think about what the body naturally does and how it naturally moves, and use resistance there. Um,
yeah.
and it seems like you're doing a lot. That's your approach also, from what I could tell. It's very natural stuff you're doing. I mean, for the most part.
Yeah, I like functional
Functional
movement,
movements. That's what
fitness
I'm
stuff,
looking at.
stuff
Yeah.
that translates to. So I'm a big grappling guy. I love jujitsu, catch wrestling. So stuff that translates into that, stuff that just
Yes.
makes you, more efficient at work. But, like, you figure for most of the time that we've been human beings, we'd be getting up and chasing after something, or fighting something
Right.
off, or hauling something here, or hauling something there. And
There you go. There's your
um,
exercise program. Yeah.
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 And the kettlebells and the sandbags really, really, and the mace and those kinds of things, these old strength tools, I think are really effective because, like, you go to a modern gym and you're working on machines and you're kind of just moving in, either up, down, forward, and back, just like two planes of movement. But you get the kettlebells or the mace or the sandbag, and there's just so many weird little muscles that it takes to lift those things up and move them around. And you're moving in so many different directions, and it's just very, very satisfying to swing a giant cannonball and
Oh, absolutely.
swing a
Yeah.
mace and all of that.
Yeah, I know. So, Brother Brian, before we finish, I want to just ask if you have any thoughts, words of wisdom, advice for folks during these crazy times we're in, because if you haven't noticed, they are kind of crazy and a little bit difficult, a lot difficult for a lot of people. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on how to manage during these difficult times?
I mean, I think it's really important for people to combat nihilism, to combat the sense that there's no meaning to anything. Like, I'm not the first person to say this, and definitely not the smartest person to say it, but we're in the midst of a meaning crisis, and our intelligentsia has really kind of poisoned us all by deconstructing all meaning out of everything and making everything relative and everything up to the subjective viewer and my truth and my lived experience.
Right.
And there's more to life than that. There is capital T truth. It is an experience. You can have it. I think it's turn off the news. Don't stay just completely plugged into what's going on politically, because these are the archons. That's it's keeping everyone in this soup of fear and anxiety and distrust. And I'm not saying totally ignore it, because there are important things happening, and good men and good citizens need to be involved in what's going on. But the just constant bombardment with negativity and nihilism, really, I think that the thing that I feel like people need to be doing is, like, coming to grips with the Western esoteric tradition, with the tradition of our ancestors, with the symbols and practices that are there in Christianity and Judaism and Islam, that are, like I said, that are treasure housed in Masonry. This is the thing to do. And we do live in crazy times, and who knows what's going to happen after November. And it's a very good idea to make yourself into a capable person, make yourself into a strong, resilient, healthy person. Eat well, take care of yourself, make yourself stronger, faster, harder to kill. You know, it's
That's
important.
right.
We're coming into times where we need to be capable. We need to, as men, we need to be
Bingo.
capable.
Yeah, and I would just add that in closing is that, and I've been telling my family this too, is that, you know, we need to, you know, be in the best shape right now and try to get healthy because we don't know what's coming. And
Yeah.
it could be trying times ahead. I don't know, but it's good to be prepared. And physical health is always an asset. You know, so if you can get in
Absolutely.
shape, you can get healthy right now, it's probably a good idea. You know, in particular in light of the COVID-19 thing, because everyone's saying, you know, if you have underlying conditions, you're more at risk. So if
Yep.
you want to reduce risk, get healthy. Now's
That's
the
right.
time.
That's right.
And I highly recommend watching Brother Brian Stanford's videos on his Facebook page if you want to get inspired, because they're really, really awesome. And he's got a unique perspective on getting in shape that I find refreshing in these days. So, but anyway, brother,
Yeah, and anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I love meeting and talking to new people, especially brother Masons, people who are interested in this kind of stuff. I accept friend requests. I text and talk to people. I love being in contact with other people who are, you know, trying to walk these paths. So please, anyone who found any of this interesting or wants to talk more about this stuff, please feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. All right, brother. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. You started my day off on
Thanks
the
for
right
having me
foot.
on.
I appreciate it.
Great.
Cheers.
All right.
Talk to you soon,
Have a good
bro.
day.
All right, you too.
Caritas.
Peace. Caritas.